It's time to cook with Susan Beck. Today I'm going to make tater tot casserole. For some of you, this might be considered a comfort food. As a child, this was not a comfort food for me. I really detested tater tot casserole and really disliked those lima beans that came in the frozen vegetables. It didn't matter whether my mom made it or we had it at school. I just was not a fan of tater tot casserole. And then when I married my husband and he said, "Gee, you never make tater tot casserole. I really like that." I'm like, "Ugh, I don't want to make tater tot casserole." Well, I decided maybe with some changes, tater tot casserole could be okay. You really can use any vegetables you want, and you do not have to buy those frozen bags of already mixed vegetables. Now, some of my vegetables are frozen because I have reached the end of my garden, so I am going to use a half a cup of frozen peas, but fresh from the garden is better. I got about a cup and a half of broccoli from my garden that was frozen, as well as some of the corn, about probably close to a cup of corn. And I am going to put in a cup of cheese, something I don't recall in my childhood version, a little cream of chicken soup, carrots, onion, just always adds a little flavor to your meat and vegetables. I also think the tater tot casserole I grew up with could have used a little more seasoning, so I'm going to use salt, pepper, and some thyme that I am still getting from my herb garden, but dried would be just fine. About 3/4 of a pound of hamburger. The other ingredient I'm going to use, of course, is tater tots. I'll get those out of the freezer when we're ready to put them on top of this casserole. I am going to put my hamburger on the stove to brown. I will just set that on medium or medium low. And try to keep an eye on that while I take care of my vegetables. My carrots will need to be peeled and chopped into little rounds. My onion will also need to be diced into small pieces. My children prefer the onions not to be so noticeable. All right. Like 3½ carrots here. These were kind of smaller carrots. 2 good-sized carrots would be sufficient. All right, cut off the ends of those. And once again, as I always do, my chickens just love these carrot scraps, so I'm just going to set those to the side to give them later on. All right, cutting through my carrots. And as I've mentioned before, keeping things somewhat the same size helps them to cook really well. My peas are small, my corn is small, I'm going to make my onions small, so I want my carrots diced up fairly small too. So I'm trying to make some fairly small round slices. Alright, now the onion, let's peel off that outer layer. This one here is a purple onion. Oh my goodness, did we have gigantic onions. I've never seen onions this big before in my garden. I have a lot of purple ones. So I'm going to use purple, but gold or white onions work just fine as well. All right, let's have a look at that hamburger. It's starting to brown on the bottom. It's time to break it up a little bit. I like these meat choppers. These just work great for sausage and hamburger and any meat you want to break into a small crumble. All right, we'll let that continue to cook until there is no pinkness left in the meat. As you can see, it's still on the raw side. The hamburger has finished browning, but there's a lot of grease in it, so I really want to get rid of that. So I am just going to put it into my colander and let it drain off so I get rid of most of the grease. I don't mind a little of the fat that's left behind. It does give it some flavor. My casserole dish, today I'm going to use this 11 by 7 glass dish. Works pretty nicely for my 3/4 cup of ground beef. I have enough to cover the bottom nicely here. If you don't have an 11 by 7, an 8 by 8 or 9 by 9 works pretty well for this. sitting by the stove here, I'm going to make another change to tater tot casserole. Usually when you buy those bags of vegetables, you just open them up and dump them in. Well, some of my vegetables are fresh, even the ones from the garden. I'm just going to saute them for a little bit in some olive oil. So I'll just turn my burner back on to medium and give a little olive oil swirl around in my saute pan here, get that oil slightly warm, and then I'm going to put my carrots and onions in first because those are my fresh vegetables that I'm using. If my broccoli had been fresh or my corn had been fresh, I'd probably put that in a little sooner. But when I freeze that, they are all like halfway cooked. You blanch them before you freeze. So we're going to let those saute in there, and boy, we're going to have some pretty colors today. One of my carrots is a little on the yellow side, and you got that orange and the purple onion, and then the green over here from our peas and broccoli. As that's sauteing, we are going to add a half a teaspoon of salt. And oops, I forgot my pepper. A couple grinds around on the pepper mill. Wooden spoon here that works well. Now, something else, just to save yourself some dishes, this is the same pan I cooked the hamburger in, so you don't really need to start over with a new saute pan. I want those carrots to be soft, kind of like I would want them if I was just serving the carrots by themselves. You know, 4 minutes or so. Again, like the onion, raw onion is just got a more bitter taste to it, and so if you can saute it in a little olive oil. And I know, these things do cook while they're in the oven, baking with the tater tots on top, but there's just something about pre-cooking them a little bit. I do this for all my soups as well. I always put my vegetables on the stove top first. The other spice that I'm going to add is my fresh thyme. Again, dried would be just fine. These sprigs of thyme come on a kind of woody stem, and I really don't want that part of it. So I can run my finger down the stem, and those leaves come off, and I can just drop them right in. The top one's not so much, you kind of have to pick at those. So a little closer look at that. Here's a sprig of thyme, and I can just run my finger down it, and there's all the little leaves. And I don't want to waste those top ones, so I'll just pluck those off myself. You could really season it with anything you like. If you'd like to have a little hint of garlic, you could put that in there as well. Basil or oregano would probably work. I don't know, but thyme has just really become like my favorite go-to herb anymore. And I started growing it in my garden so that I could have it fresh for, at least like 5 months of the year, because even though it's frosted out, my thyme seems to be okay out there in the garden. And I think maybe it inspired me with my title, Time to Cook, for my cooking shows. Alright, now those carrots are getting close to the point where they would be fairly soft and ready to eat, so I'm going to add in my broccoli and my corn and that little handful of peas. Again, absolutely no lima beans in my tater tot casserole. But if you like lima beans, go for it. Alright, that broccoli's still a little frozen, so I kind of like to get that softened up, and the other vegetables that I just put in, just a little heat through. Plus, they get a little of those herbs on them as well as the olive oil, which just gives a little more flavor to this than a bag of vegetables right out of the freezer. Even if you're using frozen vegetables, just give them a little saute in olive oil and add a little spice to them. Now it's time to layer everything together. We already put our first layer of ground beef in the bottom of our baking dish, and onto that is going to go these beautiful vegetables. Topping these will be that can of cream of chicken soup. A little rubber spatula, and it helps to get that spread over top. And you just need a thin layer. It doesn't have to be real thick, so just kind of work it around so there's some everywhere. So that's our third layer. Our fourth layer will be the cheese. I'm using cheddar cheese today in my tater tot casserole. And again, how much you use is kind of up to you. I probably have just a little over a cup there, I would guess. And then the fifth layer, the last layer, is your tater tots. I have these little round ones today. Whether you use the little rounds or the cylinder-shaped ones, it's up to you. And I don't know, I always take the time. You could just pour them on, but I always take the time to kind of line them up nicely on there. So I'm going to cover my tater tot casserole with all these tater tots. Now the tater tots always cook at a fairly high temperature, so I always think to get my tater tots done, I want my oven turned up pretty high as well. So I am going to cook this at 400 degrees and keep it in the oven for about 25 minutes. I guess the big key, you know, the vegetables are already pretty cooked. The cheese is going to melt fast. I want my tater tots to kind of crisp up like they would if I was just eating tater tots by themselves. So I'm just about done putting these on, and into the oven it will go to make a delicious tater tot casserole that I actually look forward to trying. All right, there we go. Oh, look at this golden bunch of tater tots on top of our tater tot casserole, and you can just see that the cheese has melted down in there. This is going to be delicious. Let's scoop up a little bit of it here. I see all those bright colored vegetables with that ground beef on the bottom. Oh, this is just steaming and it's so cheesy, and this is just not your typical tater tot casserole. You really need to give this a try, choosing vegetables that you actually enjoy eating. If you'd like to have a side dish with it, watch last week's post of a garlic parmesan breadstick. Now this is delicious tater tot casserole.